So welcome to another wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And I suppose this is our kind of more of a first impressions type video.
Yeah, because this game's pretty big.
Yes.
It's pretty big. We played a fairly small scenario to try to get an understanding for the mechanics.
Yes. So this is Fire in the Sky from PHALANX.
Second edition, right? From the game that was from MMP, I think, originally, correct?
Yes. Which I think
10 years
itself
ago.
was a translation of the original game in Japanese.
Okay.
I believe. Because the designer is Tetsuya Nagamura.
That's very good.
Yes. I've been practicing. And
Sugoi.
you lost me. But I think it's... He originally made the game in Japanese. I think it was translated and published by MMP. I believe.
Okay.
And then it was put out more recently because it was out of print for a very long time.
Yeah.
And then PHALANX just did an edition with mounted maps, redid all the artwork on it, and so
I like the counters a lot. I like how their sizes. You know, aircraft are kind of hexes or hexagons, right?
Yeah, they're small hexagons. Yeah. And then the infantry are slightly bigger circles, and then the naval ships are slightly bigger again, squares. Yeah. So I very much appreciate the production of this.
Yes.
It made it very easy to kind of play with and to reference and to look at things, generally speaking.
Yeah. And the reality about the counters is, I mean, if you look at these counters, there's a lot of information on there.
Yes.
But I think it's presented in such a way with good graphics and good symbols that it was not a hard thing at all to pick it up.
Yeah.
Because it's very different than your normal, firepower, movement, defense value,
Yeah. Generally speaking, it was very clear. The production was great. The maps are mounted and have a kind of a unique style with the kind of dark blue and grey hue to everything. But
then, it's not the normal bright blue.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is, I don't know, it was easy to look at. It was easy on the eyes. It wasn't garish. But then you've got, white and red Japanese counters and kind of a very rich royal blue.
Yeah.
U.S. and British and Commonwealth forces are red. Those stand out a lot more against the map. You're not getting lost or anything as well. So this is like a two-player strategic Pacific war game.
Yes.
It's a very high level. Your counters represent multiple units of that particular type of naval ship, or you'll have like an entire Marine division on a single counter, or entire Japanese armies on one counter.
Well, and it's interesting also the ship counters. They've kind of amalgamated two different types of that craft into one counter, which I thought was pretty interesting. So this is the Junyo and the Hiyo. So just kind of interesting, a carrier.
Yeah, I presume that was done as a way, they were rarely separated, and also it stops having 15 counters.
They were in the same task force, moved to the same battles. So that's how they represented it. But
this is... So there's a number of different scenarios in it. You can play for the whole campaign, which is like 16 turns.
And would be a very long game.
Yes.
Combat's very involved. You're going to have maybe 1 to 3 combats per round, and they're fairly involved.
There's a lot of steps.
Yeah, from the disposition of your different task forces to the air power... Just a lot of different roles, and I thought it was laid out well. It's just a 16-turn game is going to take, I think, a very long time to play.
Yeah, because, at this scale, where considering it's the entirety of the Pacific, and it might look like there's a big pile of counters and stuff.
Yeah.
The reality is you don't have as many counters on the board as you might think. Like, it could have been an awful lot more, at least.
Yeah.
But when you get into a combat, I'm moving in, 7 or 8 ships, maybe a couple airplanes, maybe I'm doing an amphibious landing as well, so I've got some land units. You might have a huge defensive naval fleet as well with some aircraft, and you stick those on a battle board, and then you get into some real crunch. If you've got sub points and you've got destroyers, you do this anti-submarine warfare and sub-hunt, and they do a little thing. Then you resolve just the air-to-air combat as you launch all your carrier fleets and any ground-based fighter support that you have. You do all of that, and then anyone who survives that then gets to do airstrikes on surface fleets or on land targets, depending on what you want to do.
Yeah, because there's a bombardment section where you can bombard.
Yeah, and then you have to survive anti-air fire from ground targets or from surface fleets, and then you get to do that if you survive.
Yeah.
Then you get to, like, anyone who's not carrier fleets and carrier task forces, you can kind of put them into this sea control, and you'll do, like, surface fleet battles where you're shooting your guns at each other.
Yeah.
Then you determine who's got sea control. Then you might do an amphibious landing.
Yeah, because you can't.
And then you do. So, like, there's a lot of different steps, and you won't do all of them every time, but you'll do a lot of them most of the time.
Depending on what unit makeup you have. But in this game, we talked about this a lot. One of the theses of this game is that air power is supreme.
Yeah, very much so. Yes.
Right. So all the aircraft carriers, the actual planes that you can, move in. You get certain reinforcements. You can place those and move them around. If you don't have that air power, you're going to lose the skies.
Yep.
And then it's just open season on your ships.
Yeah, and your ships get picked off, which means you're less likely to have control of the sea, which means your amphib landings
aren't going to work. Yeah.
So that was a very interesting part of this game.
Yeah.
It was very evident, very early on, that that's really something that they were trying to model and to push in this. And it was very evident in this game versus some other Pacific games, where you might have just a bit more of like, oh, these guys have like extra range or a really strong firepower in the carriers. You have air power strength, and you commit your air points, and you do all of this. All of those steps and the layers of combat really drive home that, like, if you can get a carrier task force screened by a bombardment task force, and you've got good air power, that air power wins in air combat. Then they do their dive bombing attacks.
Yeah.
And they screen all the other stuff that's going on. And being able to see that play out was very interesting, and I think that's part of what the designer was really trying to get across. And I did feel that part of this game.
Yeah, and I think it's actually fairly well done. This game comes down to, and we talked a lot about this as well, in any Pacific War game, typically Japanese have they land the first haymakers, right? They come out punching for the first 3, maybe 4 rounds until Midway happens and they lose half their fleet and they just don't have the ability to really catch up. Then it's like hold off, and then the Americans just ramp up.
Yeah, and it's at that point for the last half or 2/3 of the game, it's just try not to die.
Yeah. So I actually like that, the way it's kind of laid out, because we played a middle scenario from 43 to 44.
Yes.
It was like 4 turns. And it was interesting because I had to think that way. I was a Japanese. And I liked that because the reality is it's going to force upon me, depending on what game we're playing, from campaign to intro to middle or late, it kind of forces on me a way of thinking.
Yes, very much so.
And I kind of like that. There's a lot of games that do that. You can try to do ahistorical stuff, but if you do that, you're going to get intercepted by a superior fleet, and it's going to be over quickly. You've really got to play cat and mouse, protect. Because ultimately, in our game, I was just trying to prevent you from gaining 6 victory points, which you're going to have to take 6 different atolls or islands. And so I kind of had the ability to kind of move here and move there and just hold you off. But I like that element of the game, and I think this will be a very interesting experience to play a full campaign game, because you're gonna cover all those gambits.
Yeah, that's one thing that I would say about this game. And again, this is just some first impressions after we played this the first time. Is that I feel like this game is a little less sandboxy and more leaning towards the historical, as opposed to something like Empire of the Sun, where there's some of those guardrails, but with your cards and your force composition, you have a lot more freedom to like do a lot of different things and to fight your battles in different places. This map is actually quite small.
Yes.
Relatively speaking, the number of hexes and the spaces between everything, the hexes are huge. There's not many on the board, and the way that your movement points are limited, and we'll get to this, your transport and your kind of oil economy
very
is
cool
very
part
limited.
of the game.
You can't do all the kind of crazy, insane stuff that you might be able to do, it's much harder to do that in this.
Well, first off, you have to move from friendly base to friendly base.
Yes, during the deployment.
To stage, right?
Yes.
You stage your task forces, and those bases are limited by their stacking limits, which are kind of, hey, is it a deep water port? Is it a shallow port?
Yeah, and there's and you know it's very fixed about where you can and can't do that.
So Japanese kind of have to go here, and the Americans kind of have these transit boxes over here from the West Coast. They get like free move across half the Pacific to Pearl, and it's done that way to try and force the action kind of, where it historically happened. Midway, the island hopping campaign. There's some options to go for
the order in which you do some of
Yeah.
those things as well.
But you're limited really by the constraints of your forces and the logistic side.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good, like you said, bumpers. I think of bowling and the gutter bumpers, and I feel like that's got some of it in here. You kind of got to follow it, but you got to follow it smartly.
Yeah, the first turn, it was like, okay, I'm trying to like push some forces out, and it's that exercise of during your major deployment phase, you can move things 4 hexes.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're counting 4 hexes, and it's that 5th hex that you can't move. It's like, oh, I can't get there.
Yeah.
And like, obviously I can't, because that would enable me to do things which were wildly and geographically inaccurate.
Yeah.
But I like that element of map making where you're like,
Yeah.
and so then you're like, cool.
It's
I
a
gotta
lot of
go through that Southwest Pacific and come up again.
It's
The
a
way they do
lot
it's
of
clever.
a lot of thought was put into the way the map was put together,
And I think
the size of the hexes.
like Pacific Victory, Empire of the Sun even has that, where how you can move is so very carefully curated, and I felt that very much in this one as well.
Yeah.
With that, the spaces combined with the stacking limits of the atolls really pushes you towards more historical things that would have happened or would have been capable of happening at least.
The other thing, and you mentioned it, the economy is a very interesting. I don't want to say it's tacked on because I feel like it's very integral. Integral to what's going on. But you have a merchant fleet, the Japanese do anyway. And that merchant fleet kind of decides the number of transport points that you have. Transport points are nothing. You would think, I think initially I was thinking, oh, that's how many land units I can amphibiously move. No, every unit that moves is a transport. It's transporting that unit.
Yeah,
it's not carrying units, it's moving.
This is like logistic points.
Yes.
It's fuel, ammunition, food. It's kind of
all
of that
amalgamated
stuff.
to one. But that's a very interesting part of it. There also is oil, which comes from resource hexes. Now, the scenario we played really ignored Malaya, Borneo, and those oil hexes. That's where that came from. But it's assumed in where we started, you had a certain amount.
Yeah, and you get points from those, but you also... It's interesting... The Japanese have this kind of dual economy. They got these transport points, which they can spend to deploy units and to move them in that phase. They can also spend them to move in the operational phase, which is kind of that actually launching into attacks afterwards.
Yep.
Or they could spend oil if they're already strapped. But if you want to... Once you've done all that, there's this kind of reaction move phase. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese, if they want to act in that phase, have to spend oil only. Can't do any of the transport points. So it's this, I'm low on both. I can't just waste my oil moving operationally because I need to reserve it for reaction move just in case something crazy happens. And so you get that really grand scale of why half of this was done in the first place.
Yeah.
So they could capture the oil fields from the Dutch East Indies and they put that economy into the game without it feeling tacked on, like you said.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting little part of the game to play with.
Well, and you have to think about it, and you have to think about, okay, I have this many points, so each round I'm going to typically be able to move 2 task forces, and it's based on their, what do they call that, transport value? Was that what that black number was?
Yes.
So it's a good task force is going to be 15 to 18 points.
Yes.
Anything smaller than that really is just a harassing force that is moving into position to kind of hold
Or it's a very risky
pieces.
task
Yeah.
force, right?
So you got to think about that. You got to think about, how am I going to use this? The other really cool thing that I liked about the rules and the way VP are scored, and we didn't actually play it, was that concept of the Japanese cutting the supply, basically from Australia to the United States.
Yeah, if they can cut that off,
Yeah.
then all of Australia's out supplying. It's a way that the Japanese can win. If they can complete that goal, which is what they were trying to do, if they can get that done, they're going to win. It is neat.
And it's interesting, in our couple of turns here, I'm trying to get that kind of set up, and so I can kind of do this. And I feel like I was succeeding, but you were just kicking my ass down there.
Yes.
I mean, that's the reality. I'm not sure I would have been able to follow up on it, because I would have had you coming down on me.
You've got to do it early.
Yeah,
You've got to do
yeah.
it end of 1941 and into 1942 and
Yeah.
keep the pressure on before the U.S. Pacific steamroller starts going.
So there were a lot of things like that. Once again, different scenarios, different lengths. There's even some different rules, and I think that's very cool. We also talked about, this. I think this would be a very good solo
Yes, I agree.
game, because you're just making the best choice and the best move. There's not a lot of hidden information unless you're doing
there's
optional.
There's optional rules where you can have your task forces hidden behind these little screens,
Yeah.
and there's like little task force counters.
But not for the Japanese, right?
No,
it's for the U.S.
only
and
for-
the British.
Yeah, which is the whole they'd broken the Japanese codes,
Yep.
and so kind of knew
Yep.
what was going on.
So
there.
I thought that was neat. That once again, it adds some elements to the game and really deepens the experience.
But that's all optional. If you just wanted
Yeah.
to play this straight solo,
you could just play it
very
solo.
easily
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
One thing that you talked about that I thought was
Stupid.
that I thought was really neat and was something that I'm coming to appreciate a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think about something like Empire of the Sun.
Mm-hmm.
The units that you can move, you're limited to by the ops value of your
Of the card.
and then the corresponding command value of your little
Yes.
of
Your base.
HQ.
Yeah. HQ.
So, like, every game, at least in the Pacific, has a way of limiting what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you just moved every single unit on the board,
be-
the game would be over very quickly.
Well, you would attack everywhere. I'm going to attack here. I'm going to attack here. I'm going to attack here.
It would be
just-
stupid. It
Yeah.
would be very ahistorical.
Yeah.
This does that through this transport
Mm-hmm.
point economy. Because, like you said, you got to get these big stacks. You got to stage them with this operational
Yep.
through this deployment phase,
Very expensive.
and that costs almost
Half your points.
And then to send them into battle is almost the other half. And then you've got a couple of these oil points to play with reaction if
Yep.
you're so inclined.
Yep.
And I really liked that it was such a clean way of being like,
Yeah.
of saying, this is what you can move, as opposed to,
Yeah.
this is what you can't move. It was a really neat way of doing it.
One of the because we love Empire of the Sun,
Oh, yeah.
and I think I always, rightly or wrongly, compare every Pacific strategic level war game that we play to Empire of the Sun. It was one of the first that we played. We fell in love with it. We love the card-driven CDG style, but that concept of the HQ unit and your ops result in this game in the transport points and the oil. It's the same concept.
Yes.
This is a little less fiddly than, say, Empire of the Sun.
From that standpoint, yes.
You're having to count hexes. 1, 2, 3, 17 hexes. And we've laughed. Like on Vassal, they have the
Empire of the Sun Vassal mod's excellent for that.
the auto, like you click it and it
It can show you with overlays of all this stuff because it needs it.
Yeah.
All of that stuff's very crunchy.
So all of that has been simplified down into this, I think, rather cool economic system that mimics that very aspect of the strategic
Yes.
concept. And I was impressed by that. And frankly, I was impressed from the moment you read the rules. I was like, oh, that's pretty nifty. And to make it even cooler, you have limited sub points as the U.S. and the Japanese. Now, the Japanese don't use them in the same way. I'm not attacking the Marine or the Merchant Marine of the Allies.
No.
I'm using it on trying to attack your
My
ships.
task forces.
But you were using yours to force me to hold back some destroyers
Yes.
Or how many oil points did I lose that one turn? 4?
So it's you lost transport points.
That's what I meant. My transport point.
But you
points.
have to have a number of transport points to bring the oil back at
Yeah.
the beginning of next turn after you
So
spent
it's
them all.
very important.
So you can't blow all your transport
No.
points, otherwise you can't get oil back home.
Yep.
So that the whole sub-economy of this game is
Yeah.
a really neat thing because, like you said, in this like anti-submarine warfare phase at the beginning,
Yeah.
like you have to decide to commit some points to
Yeah.
you're spending transport points to keep some destroyers
Yeah,
back, which weakens your conventional
It
forces.
does. It does.
And you put them in this convoy escort, so they're off doing not frontline combat work.
And it's really a crapshoot die roll, right? It's
you
it's not going to help you every time.
But if you don't, then I've got this unrestricted sub warfare where I've got a couple sub points and I'm chucking dice, and each success I get removes 2 transport points.
Yeah.
And so if you don't do that, you'll lose even more transport points, which means you can move fewer ships because you've got to keep more to get more oil to move. That's a very cool interplay.
I thought that was, and I hate to say that because this is not a logistics game, but a big part of it is logistics because that's what this war was. The Pacific theater was huge. The Pacific Ocean is like how much of the world?
I mean,
40%.
You know, you've got India over here.
Not even on the map.
But like, there's half the world.
Yeah,
it really is.
So it always has to be about logistics.
It really does.
Even more so than Western Front, World War II. There's some logistics, but it's not. OCS fans are saying, what are they talking about? Supply and logistics are always. It is always part of it, but I just really liked the way they did that. And I think a lot of times in games, designs like this, I'm always blown away by the way that they've creatively integrated those elements into the gameplay.
Yeah, this was generally speaking a very clean way to do logistics.
Yeah.
And so it's important, and you got to do it, but the rules aren't complicated.
No.
Where you're bogged down in that instead
Counting
of
hexes.
I came to play a war game. I want to fight.
Yeah.
We're going to do that within the constraints of my logistics, but I'm not playing a logistics game with some fighting at the end.
This gets you into the fighting pretty quick.
Yes.
You know what you can and can't do. The other thing that I will compare this to Empire of the Sun is the reaction side.
Yes.
Right? You can use some of your points to react. The Japanese can use their oil to react. And that's very similar to the what is it called?
It's the same.
But what's it? It's called some. I want to say it's like espionage roll, but that's
it's a surprise roll.
That's it. And the bigger your task force, the more points you used,
the harder it is to hide.
The harder it is to hide. And I've always thought that was cool because hell, I can't attack you at Guadalcanal with only 2 ships.
No,
I got to take 6. So therefore, it's almost always going to get intercepted. That's the one thing about Empire of the Sun that I still haven't figured out. How do I actually do something without moving 13 ships and getting intercepted by 13 enemy ships? You know, but I think both of the games do that very well. This was simpler. I thought there's no roll. It's just kind of automatic.
Yeah, you just, do I want to spend my stuff to get guys in or to retreat out?
There's a cost, but you just have to say, I'm going to spend this because, hey, it's important. And in one of our first battles, you kind of, because I just wasn't sure exactly how combat was going to work. We knew the rules. I was like, oh, well, I would have never done that. Yeah, I would have not attacked there because I thought your ships
move in and you're like, I'll spend the oil to
get out, and I should have.
And
but I wanted to fight. I wanted to see how it went, and I got obliterated. But we learned from it, and then the next time we play it, hopefully that won't happen. I really want to play the same scenario.
But that's another hallmark of most war games, but I think specifically Pacific war games, is that where's the tipping point of I'm committing too many units?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've got to commit enough where I can get good odds to where I'm going to win it.
Yeah.
But not so much where if I lose, it's catastrophic and the game's over.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's much harder to do that in like conventional land battle hex encounter games. It's possible, but this Pacific games are always like, you can get into the decisive game. battle of the game.
The Battle of Midway. I mean, that's one of those
you
battles.
get the two big stacks up against each other, and if one of them gets wiped on a bad roll, you may as well stop playing the game.
Because it's going to be a real tough road to hoe.
The outcome's determined.
Yeah.
You're just doing the rest of it for, like, enjoyment's sake.
Sure.
Right? But, and this is very much that, but I like that you can react out of battles.
Yes.
I think that's a very, very neat way. You're like, oh, we're kind of staging, then the non-phasing player is going to put guys in, and then you get to this reaction phase, and you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, this is worse than I thought it was. Or
deeply outnumbered. Yeah. Let's move back.
Yeah.
And that's where, when you get into the hidden task forces, you've just got this question mark counter, and you can't quite be sure what's under there.
No.
Where if you play it straight, you're like, nope, I'm leaving.
And you generally know what the Japanese have as the Americans,
yes.
you know, but they don't know what you've got. So it makes for a little bit of cat and mouse, and I think there were some things I was too aggressive about and would have probably done differently. But overall, I think this game is a very good representation of the battle in the Pacific. Well designed, well put together to really mimic everything that we have come to know about this part of World War II. I'm not an expert on it, but I know there's certain things. I was glad to see that air power was really important.
Very.
I'm glad to see the way that they did it. I thought it worked very well. I also really liked the reliance on the oil and the economic points, just very well done. And frankly, the anti-submarine warfare, very, very cool. Yes. Very well done, kind of in a very simplified, abstracted way that worked really well. I liked it.
Yeah, I enjoyed this economy part of the game. I thought that was a really neat way of kind of underpinning everything. I cannot stress this enough, without being complex and convoluted.
Yeah.
I thought it was really well done. And then, so you're going to do like one or two combats in a turn at most. You just
you don't have a point. You don't have points enough.
And so you kind of move everything, and then you'll do like a big combat. And the combat slows down a lot, right? It's a very long sequence of play with all the different phases of combat, but all of it is very not almost intuitive in the sense that you're like, the submarines do their submarine stuff, and your destroyers kind of try to defend that. After that, we do the air-to-air combat, and then that has an outcome. Then we resolve whatever air power's left, and their anti-air and their air. And then we do surface fleet stuff. And then you do... So you kind of go through all the layers of combat. And the layers of combat it was fun to kind of progress through that and see how this massive operation at this scale would go. And that's just like one big combat. You might have another if you've got a lot of transport points, but usually that you're really only doing like one... or maybe one other tiny one, which is much quicker when they're small.
Well, in this scenario, you can also do several land battles, because there's several areas where you're set up in direct conflict with each other immediately. You know, Guadalcanal is one. Ley, I'm trying to think where else. But anyway, you can do some of those, and it doesn't require as many, but you still got to get some air in there.
Yeah.
Well, like here, this one right here, it was so interesting. Rabaul, I needed to get my aircraft in there because we're basically dead even on, and I don't want to sit there and just pummel each other. I want to actually have a way to win and beat you.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think there's a lot well done here. And I wanted to go back to one other earlier comment you made. I think the map is really nice.
Yeah.
I think it really is different, and it sets this game apart. And I like the grayscale. I really do.
And this was really cheap on pre-order as well.
How much? Do you remember how much it was?
I think
like
when it was pre-ordered, it was $45.
And this is easily a $75 war game.
Yes, you would pay much more for much worse quality with a lot of other companies out there. So they did a really good job with this game. The rules themselves, they've gone through a number of iterations over the various, and so no issues with them whatsoever.
Yeah. I thought they were pretty clear when we were going through them.
The only thing I would have wanted is 2 play aids.
One player aid.
There's one play aid, and then the other one's on the back of the rule book, which is cool. Don't do that.
You could just make a copy of this, but
sure,
still.
But it also doesn't have a sequence of play on it.
Right, it doesn't.
And whilst that's not the biggest deal...
Well, it's on the map. Right, it's printed on the.
Okay,
and I was sitting on that side, so I was following it. I was like, "Here's what we do next." I remember you looking at me going,
"See that?"
How do you know?
Yeah.
I guess I just never spilt the beans, but
No.
it's right there.
Let's see what the combat
Yeah, the combat phase is right there.
Which that's
Yeah,
that's
it's
the hard bit.
hilarious.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe
I'm sorry, I kept that secret
That's
from
okay.
you.
Well, so you don't need a play aid, and I do.
Right, that's basically
And that's why they only gave you one.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It works out well.
But still.
I rescind that.
Yeah, the play aid does have like the different tables, surface combat. The combat is there, but damage schedule, air. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff there that it would have been nice to have another play aid.
Yeah, and the other thing I will say is that this... It's not necessarily... Some of the things that you're trying to do might not be the most conventional.
Yeah.
Like this, some of the rules and the way that the game functions was, slightly different from your average hex encounter game. But they have a very, very in-depth kind of example of play in the back of the scenario book. So
if you want to learn how to play
this,
this, I think the rule book is going to guide you right into that. So overall, good experience for me. I'd like to try it again.
Yeah.
Armed with some knowledge, experience, understanding better of the systems, how it works together. I think our game would turn out significantly different.
Yeah, even from how you put together your task forces,
Oh yeah,
what ships you assign into different roles. You can get into a lot of the kind of weeds of this.
Yeah.
And how you even deploy those forces.
Yep.
You'll learn and get better and better and better at those kinds of things and be able to execute your operations, more efficiently.
Yeah.
So yeah, Fire in the Sky from Phalanx. Big game.
Well,
takes a long time.
And it's a 2021 game.
Yes.
So I'm not sure this one will appear on my top 10 list, but it's a really good game. It doesn't mean that it's not good.
It's that we need more time with it. I think.
Yeah, I felt like Atlantic Chase that we played 3 or 4 times early in the year. If I could do that with this, I think I would become more comfortable with it and feel a little more connected to it.
More of this.
Unfortunately, we're kind of running late in the year, and we're trying to play 2 or 3 final games, and this is not a full review. We're not even going to show all the components in the board, although
it's pretty in depth. Yeah, if we revisit this, we'll get to it. Though.
But I think it's a good, solid game. If you like the Pacific Theater, and you don't want something like Pacific War, that's going to be 350 hours for a campaign game. This can be played 16 turns, probably 8 to 10 hours.
And you can just both hand solo it, which is much easier than something like Empire of the Sun or Victory in the Pacific, which is a block war game.
Yeah.
This is really good for that aspect of it as well. So I would
recommend it. I think it would be good for solitaire play.
Yes. So, Fire in the Sky from Phalanx. Check it out if you're interested. There's plenty of information about it online because it's been around. You might be looking at stuff from the first edition, but check it out if you're interested as well.
Don't compare this to the first edition. I mean, we looked at some of the pictures on BGG. We don't have it.
But the rules.
The rules,
if you wanted to kind of learn, there's no...
I just think this has become so much more refined from the rule book to the components and everything. Just looks so much... I was looking at some of the pictures the other day, and I was like, it looks like a cheap...
It's old.
First run game that was 15, 20 years ago. So definitely upgraded, definitely a step in the right direction, and I think this is a solid game that I'd love to give some more time to.
Yes. So appreciate you guys tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.